When life falls apart, most people think they need to wait for things to get better to feel strong again. But true winners do the opposite. They become strong, while everything is falling apart. And that's exactly what Amy Cuddy reveals: how to activate a mindset of strength and mastery, even in the phases where you feel most broken inside. In the next few seconds, you'll discover why your body, mind, and how you react to chaos completely define your future. And if you understand this now, you'll never face a setback the same way again. So sign up now, because here, you'll learn to think like someone who not only wins, but wins precisely in the moments when everyone else would give up. The psychological secret that keeps you standing. The psychological secret that keeps you standing isn't born in moments of strength, but in the silent instance when everything seems to crumble and yet you decide not to give in. It works like an invisible anchor, a mental structure that activates when chaos tries to take over, and which Amy Cuddy describes as the ability to internally assume a posture that your body cannot yet express. It's the ability to support yourself even when the world around you pushes in the opposite direction. This secret isn't associated with motivation or ready-made phrases, but with how the brain interprets physical sensations, internal language, and how you position yourself in the face of reality. When everything falls apart, the brain reacts with a primitive protective instinct. It narrows perception, increases fear, and reduces clarity. The mind begins to look for threats everywhere and interprets every sensation as a sign of imminent failure. This is precisely where the real central point comes in: learning to interrupt this cycle before it becomes absolute. The psychological secret that keeps you standing is the ability to send the brain information that contradicts the emotional collapse it is trying to reinforce. It's not about denying the pain, but about preventing it from dictating the course of events. This mechanism works on three interconnected levels. First, the body. When you are emotionally shaken, the body adopts a hunched posture. Shoulders slump, breathing shortens, and the chest tightens. The brain interprets this pattern as a sign of defeat. Altering this pattern, even minimally, sends the opposite signal: there is still room for resistance. It's not about appearing strong, but about not allowing the body to reinforce the internal narrative of failure. By creating small physical and respiratory expansions, you dismantle the automatic message that you are powerless. The second level is internal dialogue. When everything is falling apart, the brain begins to narrate a rigid and pessimistic story. Without realizing it, You mentally repeat absolute conclusions like, nothing will work out, or I have no way out. The psychological secret that keeps you standing is to replace this type of narrative with language that opens up space for possibilities. It's not positive thinking, it's functional thinking. It's telling yourself phrases that interrupt the internal collapse, such as, how can I deal with this now? Or, what is still under my control? Small changes in language reorganize perception. The brain stops seeing a wall and starts seeing an opening. The third level is focus. In crises, the mind tends to fixate on what went wrong or what could go wrong. This focus fuels the feeling of being down and accelerates the state of helplessness. The secret to sustaining you is shifting your focus to what is still possible. By doing this, you change the brain's biological behavior, which stops seeking danger and starts seeking opportunities for stability. This doesn't erase the problem, but it reduces the paralysis it causes. By refocusing on what you can touch, adjust, and decide, the mind gains firmness and the feeling of being down loses intensity. This psychological secret isn't magic. It's built practically, repeatedly, consciously. When you notice your body shutting down, you adjust. When you notice your mind narrating catastrophe, you correct it. When you notice your focus stuck on the impossible, you redirect it. These are small actions, but profoundly strategic. They prevent the brain from transforming a momentary setback into a permanent one. And over time, this process creates an internal resistance that doesn't depend on external circumstances. What keeps you standing is not the absence of fear, but the ability to not allow fear to dictate your response to the world. It's the sum of small internal postures that transform into a solid emotional structure. When everything falls apart, the psychological secret that sustains you is the decision not to collapse along with it. It's the act of organizing your body, mind, and focus so that chaos doesn't guide your choices. It's a conscious return to your own strength when it seems to have disappeared. That's what keeps you firm even when everything else seems to crumble. How to reprogram your body to avoid emotional breakdown. Reprogramming the body to avoid emotional collapse is a process that begins long before the critical moment. The human body responds to signals that it interprets as threat or safety, and this interpretation doesn't happen rationally. It originates at the physiological level, where breathing, posture, muscle tension, and even the rhythm of thoughts create messages that the brain decodes as calm or danger. When something bad happens, the body doesn't wait for you to think before reacting. It acts first. Therefore, the secret is not in trying to control emotions at the height of chaos, but in training your body to recognize that the situation doesn't require a collapse. The body has a system called the fight-or-flight response, activated whenever it senses a threat, even if that threat is only an internal sensation. When breathing shortens, shoulders hunch, and posture shrinks, the brain understands that you have lost power, so it amplifies the fear. This mechanism is automatic, but it can be reprogrammed. The first way to do this is to change your breathing pattern. Long, deep diaphragmatic breathing sends a direct signal to the nervous system saying that the threat is not real, even if the mind is still distressed. This signal slows the heart rate, reduces the production of stress hormones, and creates a physiological basis for self-control. This is not just a calming technique. It is literally teaching the body not to press the internal panic button. The second form of reprogramming lies in posture. The body registers expansion and contraction as emotional codes. When you shrink, the brain interprets that it needs to protect itself. When you expand, even minimally, it understands that you have space to react. This relationship between body and mind is so profound that physical change often precedes emotional change. Keeping your spine straight, your shoulders aligned, and your chin slightly raised is not a gesture of arrogance. It's a silent command that informs the brain that it doesn't need to activate emergency mode. That's why, even in moments of tension, adjusting the body changes the mental state in a few moments. Another part of reprogramming involves awareness of microsignals of tension: clenched hands, a tightened jaw, a fixed gaze on the ground. Each small gesture like this acts as a trigger that increases the chance of emotional collapse. When you begin to identify these microsignals, you can interrupt the cycle before it grows. Relaxing your jaw, opening your hands, directing your gaze towards the horizon, loosening your neck muscles. These adjustments seem small, but they break the automatic pattern that leads to loss of control. The body learns that it can respond in another way, without freezing, without collapsing. Reprogramming the body also means reducing the impact of negative self-talk. The brain doesn't clearly distinguish between thought and reality. When you feed yourself phrases like, "nothing will work out," or "I can't handle it," the body receives this information as a red alert. This increases cortisol, accelerates breathing, and perpetuates the downward spiral. To reverse this, the body needs to hear short, direct, and rhythmic affirmations that act as physiological anchors. Messages like, I am here, I can handle this, I am breathing, bring focus to the present, slow down the nervous system, and build a cycle opposite to collapse. This isn't about artificial positivity, but about the conscious activation of internal stability. Another essential point is to train the body in neutral moments, not just during difficult times. Just as a muscle only strengthens with repetition, the body only learns safety if it is practiced. Walking steadily, breathing deeply throughout the day, adjusting posture in common situations, quickly identifying small tensions. Each repetition sends the brain the message that you have control over your internal state. Over time, the most automatic reaction ceases to be collapse and becomes stability. This creates a kind of body memory that is activated when you face an emotionally intense situation. Ultimately, reprogramming the body means understanding that it is not just a reflection of emotions, but also a guide to them. When you teach the body to respond with openness, full breathing, conscious relaxation, and a stable posture, the brain follows this path. The result is that, even when everything falls apart around you, the body doesn't immediately collapse. It recognizes an inner place of strength, creates space to think, to breathe, to act. And this space is precisely what differentiates collapse from surrender, impact from destruction, fear from resilience. It is in this space that true emotional strength is born, built not through loose thoughts, but through a body that has learned not to fall apart under pressure. What do you say to yourself when no one is watching? What you say to yourself when no one is watching is, in fact, the dialogue that builds or destroys your inner strength. This kind of silent conversation is so constant and automatic that you often don't even realize it controls how you react to the world. When you are alone, without needing to impress anyone, without needing to maintain a social posture, that's when your thoughts show who is really governing your mind. And this governance can be fair and encouraging, or it can be cruel and sabotaging. Therefore, thinking like a winner begins precisely in those intimate moments, in the seconds when you hear words that no one else has heard, but that have enough power to lift you up or bring you down entirely. This internal dialogue stems from past experiences, expectations, fears, and distorted interpretations that the brain creates to try to protect you. However, this protection often turns into an attack. In stressful situations, the brain tends to remember failures, exaggerate risks, and create imaginary scenarios where everything goes wrong. It does this because it's programmed to avoid pain, not to build courage. And that's precisely where the importance of mastering your internal conversation arises. If you don't control what you say to yourself, you end up living within stories that never existed, but which still determine your decisions, your energy, and your steps. When everything seems difficult, that inner voice becomes even louder. And it's at that moment that many people believe that negative thoughts are absolute truths. But they aren't. The mind creates automatic phrases like, "it will never work," "you failed again," "you're not good enough." And these phrases are repeated without analysis, as if they were facts. Thinking like a winner doesn't mean ignoring difficulties, but learning to observe these thoughts clearly, understanding that they are merely emotional reactions and not orders you need to obey. The first step is realizing that the brain speaks automatically, but you choose whether or not to respond. This process requires attention. When no one is watching, you can identify the tone you use against yourself. Sometimes it's a harsh, impatient, ironic, or even hostile tone. And this type of language shapes your inner posture, affecting your energy, your motivation, and your ability to react. If the internal dialogue is aggressive, you start to move like someone defeated. If it's encouraging, even if firm, you begin to act like someone who still has power. A winner is not born from luck, but from the discipline of correcting their own inner voice whenever it tries to darken everything around them. Thinking like a winner means working on that conversation behind the scenes, without witnesses. It's in those moments when fear appears, and you calmly respond mentally, saying you can try again. It's when frustration arises, and you choose to interpret it as part of the process, not as a sign of inability. It's when emotional exhaustion tries to convince you to give up, and you decide to patiently engage in dialogue, remembering that you've been through a lot and are still here. This construction doesn't happen in a day. It's a daily, silent, and often tiring job, but it's what transforms an ordinary person into someone resilient. With each negative thought that arises, there's an opportunity to reorganize what your mind is trying to tell you. It's not about creating illusions or repeating empty phrases. It's about establishing a type of internal conversation that is functional, lucid, and strategic. You can question your hasty conclusions, challenge exaggerated fears, and dismantle old beliefs that no longer serve the life you want to have. When you do this, you're not faking confidence. You're building confidence. Gradually, the brain learns new ways of thinking and begins to generate thoughts that help instead of hindering. This is the point that differentiates those who collapse from those who grow during the storm. The person who collapses completely believes in everything they think, The person who grows learns to think about their own thoughts, to choose what is worth listening to and what should be discarded. Internal dialogue becomes a tool, not a sentence. It becomes a space where you organize ideas, stabilize emotions, and create more balanced interpretations of what you are experiencing. It's not always a positive conversation, but it's a strategic conversation that moves you forward. When no one is watching, you have complete freedom to be cruel to yourself or to be fair, and that choice will define your energy when the world demands strength. How you treat yourself in solitude transforms into how you behave in public. A winner is born in that silence, in the words that no one else hears, but which build the invisible structure upon which all their emotional strength rests. This structure is made of mental discipline, self-knowledge, and the courage to correct oneself. Those who master this internal dialogue no longer depend on external motivation, praise, or approval. They create their own strength, even when everything seems to crumble around them. Why your brain sabotages you and how to shut it up in 2 minutes. There comes a moment when your mind seems to turn against you. An unexpected thought arises, a doubt that didn't exist before, a feeling of weakness that makes everything seem heavier than it really is. This phenomenon doesn't happen by chance. It's a direct result of how the human brain has been programmed to function over thousands of years. The brain wasn't designed to make you win. It was designed to make you survive, and to survive, it always assumes that something bad might happen. This ancient programming causes it to create negative scenarios, amplify small fears, and anticipate failures. When you enter a moment of vulnerability, your brain activates this automatic mode and begins sending internal messages that undermine your strength. That's why, in stressful situations, you feel as if you're surrounded by thoughts that only pull you down. The mechanism responsible for this is simple to understand. When the brain perceives any sign of emotional or physical threat, it releases responses that previously served to deal with predators and real dangers. Today, these dangers are not wild animals, but rather rejections, abrupt life changes, financial uncertainties, criticism, and responsibilities. However, the brain reacts in the same way. It tries to prevent you from exposing yourself, tries to make you retreat, tries to convince you that it's not worth trying something new. It's a kind of internal alarm that doesn't know how to differentiate between life challenges and truly fatal situations. Therefore, This alarm goes off at the wrong time, leading you to doubt yourself and believe that you are incapable, weak, or insufficient. This process is so automatic that, when you realize it, you're already consumed by negative self-talk. It arises silently, infiltrates your thoughts, and occupies the space that should be used for clear reasoning. Mental sabotage works like a downward pull. You try to react, but your mind projects scenarios where everything goes wrong. And the more attention you pay to this flow of distorted ideas, the harder it becomes to act courageously. The brain creates a loop that keeps you trapped in fear, indecision, and a drop in emotional energy. But there is a practical way to interrupt this cycle using a simple technique that Amy Cuddy studied and that only takes 2 minutes. The logic behind it is that the body has the power to send signals to the brain, reversing the self-sabotaging process. When the brain immerses you in negative thoughts, it is reacting to how it perceives your internal posture. If the body is hunched over, withdrawn, tense, or contracted, the brain interprets this as a sign of danger. In response, it intensifies the fear. However, when you do the opposite, when you use the body as a tool to send a message of strength, the brain quickly reassesses the situation. The practice involves assuming an expansive, firm, and open posture for 2 minutes. This physical expansion activates a chemical and neurological shift. Breathing deepens, circulation improves, stress levels decrease, and the brain reduces the production of alarm signals. Instead, it begins to release internal sensations associated with safety and capability. In just 2 minutes, the body manages to convince the brain that you are not in danger. When this happens, the negative internal dialogue loses power, and you regain control over your thoughts. This process isn't magic or a superficial trick. It's a way of using your own biology to your advantage. When you change how you occupy space in your environment, you change the message you send to yourself. And this change interrupts mental sabotage because it breaks the cycle that fuels fear. Instead of letting your brain continue in automatic mode, you take control and restore clarity to your mind. It's like opening a window in a dark room. The light doesn't eliminate the room, but it completely changes how you see what's there. By restoring balance in 2 minutes, you achieve something important. You show your brain that it doesn't need to protect you at that moment, and this opens up space to think rationally, act calmly, and see possibilities that were previously obscured by fear. This method proves that strength lies not only in the mind or only in the body, but in the connection between the two. When this connection is used consciously, sabotage loses its power, and you regain the right to choose how you want to feel in the face of adversity. The mind may have been programmed to fear, but you can teach it to trust again every time everything around you seems to crumble. Transforming losses into psychological fuel. Transforming losses into psychological fuel is one of the most powerful skills a human being can develop because it requires a profound internal reconfiguration. When something goes wrong, when a project fails, when a door closes, or when life slips out of control, the most common reaction is to interpret it as proof of inadequacy. The mind creates harsh narratives, repeated countless times, until the individual believes they lost because they weren't good enough. But the proposal here is completely different. Instead of succumbing to emotional paralysis, the idea is to train the brain to see each setback as a source of raw, unpolished energy capable of propelling you to a stronger and more conscious phase. This doesn't mean romanticizing suffering, but rather learning to manipulate your own internal response so that it works in your favor. The first step is to observe the loss without panicking. When something breaks, the brain interprets it as a threat and triggers automatic mechanisms. It is at this moment that the body shrinks, the chest sinks, and breathing becomes shallow. This physiological reaction is responsible for blocking much of rational reasoning. Therefore, the transformation begins precisely at this point. Upon realizing the impact of the loss, you need to prevent your body from continuing to shrink. Straightening your posture, opening your chest, and breathing more deeply is not just a physical adjustment, but a signal sent to the nervous system itself that the danger is not total, that you still have mental space to decide what to do next. This stabilizes the mind enough to allow for a second essential step, analyzing the loss as if it were raw material, not a final point. Loss contains information that often goes unnoticed when emotional pain is in control. There's always something hidden in what went wrong. A pattern, a hasty choice, a recurring habit, an ignored limit, an expectation that was never realistic. When you face loss as raw data, you can extract elements from it that act as internal fuel. This fuel emerges when you understand that failure doesn't define you, but reveals something about how you are operating. It illuminates blind spots. It reveals parts of your personality that needed strengthening. It shows behaviors that were leading you to burnout. By interpreting loss in this way, it stops weakening your identity and starts refining your strategy. Psychological fuel arises from the friction between what you wanted and what actually happened. This friction produces powerful energy when you accept that it's not possible to return to the previous state, but it is entirely possible to move forward from there. It's as if each failure creates a natural impulse, an emotional pressure that demands to be channeled. If you don't channel it, it becomes destructive self-criticism. But if you choose to channel this energy into conscious action, it becomes strength. And here comes a crucial element that many people ignore. Loss leaves traces, a kind of emotional map showing exactly where you need to intervene. Perhaps it's discipline, perhaps it's clarity, perhaps it's courage, perhaps it's patience. Transforming loss into fuel means using this map to evolve in a practical, not abstract way. Another fundamental point is reflection without judgment. Many people try to understand where they went wrong while mentally punishing themselves for their mistakes. This only amplifies the pain and robs them of any real learning. Reflection needs to be direct, honest, but never cruel. Instead of thinking, I failed, think, what can I take from this moment that makes me stronger for the next one? This type of question changes the internal dialogue and puts the mind in a state of construction, not destruction. From there arises the psychological strength that propels you to reorganize your steps with more firmness. Finally, the transformation is complete when you use loss as a reminder of your ability to continue. Every adversity faced creates a kind of internal memory of resilience. When you look at loss not as an enemy, but as a catalyst, it becomes the starting point of a new cycle. You stop fighting against what happened and start fighting for what can happen. That's how loss ceases to be a burden and becomes an impetus. The pain doesn't disappear, but it changes its function. Instead of pulling you down, it pushes you forward with more awareness, more preparedness, and more emotional maturity. That's how you react with strength when everything seems to collapse. That's how you transform loss into fuel for growth. The expansion technique that increases courage. The expansion technique is one of the most fascinating concepts studied by Amy Cuddy because it shows that the body is not only a reflection of the mind, but also a direct command to it. When you feel pressured, emotionally shrunk, or overwhelmed by fear, your body automatically shrinks. Your shoulders slump, your breathing becomes shallow, your gaze narrows, and the brain interprets this posture as a clear sign of threat. The expansion technique works in exactly the opposite way. It teaches that by consciously expanding your body, you send the brain the message that you are not in danger. And as a result, a feeling of courage begins to emerge even if nothing in your immediate reality has changed. It's as if you access a reserve of strength that has always been there, but was blocked by the way you physically positioned yourself in life. The basis of this technique stems from a simple idea. The body reacts to what you feel, but it also has the power to create what you need to feel. When someone tenses up due to fear or anxiety, the brain receives this physical signal and releases defense mechanisms that further increase insecurity. The expansion technique interrupts this cycle. It doesn't depend on motivational words, doesn't require great effort, and doesn't need a special environment. What it requires is simply a physical adjustment, a deliberate change in how you occupy the space around you. From the moment you open your chest, breathe deeply and allow your body to occupy more volume. Something subtle begins to change inside. The mind begins to respond to the body and not the other way around. The process can be described as a kind of silent dialogue between posture and emotion. By expanding your body, you alter your internal perception of yourself. Instead of feeling small in the face of challenges, you create a sense of presence. The technique consists of lifting your chin, opening your shoulders, lengthening your spine, and breathing deeply, as if you were preparing to face something important. This expansion is not theatrical or exaggerated. It is simply a return to the posture your body naturally assumes when it is confident. The secret is to maintain this position for a few minutes. Within this short period, physiological changes begin to occur. Breathing stabilizes, the mind becomes clearer, and the nervous system stops acting as if you were about to lose control. It's interesting to see how quickly the brain responds to your posture. When you shrink back, it interprets that as vulnerability, and this interpretation affects your decisions, your focus, and even your ability to react to difficult situations. The expansion technique does the opposite. It creates an alignment between body and decision. Even if fear is still present, it ceases to control your thoughts. Expansion acts as a physical reminder that you can breathe, think, and act even under pressure. It creates a pause between stimulus and reaction, allowing you to choose your response instead of acting solely on instinct. The technique also has a specific effect on the perception of time. In moments of tension, everything seems urgent, tight, and confusing. When you expand your body, you also expand your sense of inner space. This reduces the feeling of emotional suffocation. Thus, fear doesn't disappear, but it loses strength. And when fear loses strength, courage appears not as a heroic feeling, but as inner stability. It's the courage to keep breathing, thinking, and moving, even when everything seems too big. That's the essence of the expansion technique. It doesn't magically transform reality, but it transforms you. And when you change your way of positioning yourself, reality seems less threatening and more manageable. Finally, the expansion technique is a way to remind the brain that you still have a choice. On days when everything seems to fall apart, that choice may be small, but it's powerful. The choice to expand, even if only for a few moments, is the choice not to completely succumb to fear. It's the choice to make your presence felt, to exist firmly, to occupy your own body with authority. And when you do that, the feeling of courage that arises isn't artificial. It's a natural response from your body, a reflection that you've decided not to shrink from life. That's how expansion reduces fear and increases courage almost instantly. How to regain control. When everything seems out of control. When everything seems out of control, the human mind enters a state of alert that distorts almost everything around it. Small problems seem enormous. Thoughts race. The body interprets any change as a threat, and you feel like you've lost your footing. This feeling isn't a lack of strength, but rather a biological mechanism trying to protect you. The problem is that when you don't understand this process, it takes over. Regaining control, then, isn't about dominating the external world, but about regaining control over how you respond to it. And that begins with understanding what's really happening inside you. When life goes off track, your brain activates survival mode. It focuses only on what's going wrong, ignoring any possibility of a solution. Regaining control means reversing this circuit. It's not instantaneous, but a deliberate practice, repeated consciously. The first step is to interrupt the flow of thoughts that grows like an internal storm. The interruption doesn't need to be complex. It can simply mean stopping for a few seconds and breathing more deeply. This doesn't solve the problem, but it slows down the mind's wandering. The focus returns inward, the body gradually calms down, and you create a small window of clarity. Within this window, the second step emerges, observing without judgment. In moments of chaos, you tend to label everything as failure, loss, or threat. This automatic interpretation is the main factor that fuels the lack of control. When you observe what is happening without condemning yourself, without exaggerating, and without running away, the problem ceases to seem like an invisible monster and becomes just an event. It doesn't mean it's easy or light, but it ceases to be endless. This simple change already reduces the emotional burden and returns some control over your mind. After that, it's necessary to reshape your perception of the situation. In times of crisis, the biggest trap is believing there's no way out. But almost always the problem lies in the magnitude you attribute to the pain, not in the pain itself. To regain control, you need to restructure how you see what's happening. Objective questions are very helpful at this stage. What exactly is the problem? What is truly within your reach? What can you do now that is possible in concrete? These questions take you out of chaotic thinking and put your mind on a logical path. Chaos doesn't withstand clarity, and the clearer the situation becomes, the less power it has over you. It's also essential to understand that regaining control doesn't mean controlling everything, but controlling your response. Often, trying to master every detail generates even more anxiety. The central idea is to reduce the scope. When everything seems out of control, choose just one small, simple, actionable task, something real and immediate. It could be organizing your environment, completing a task, adjusting your breathing, making a note, separating what depends on you from what doesn't. The act of performing a concrete action creates a profound sense of regaining control. Your brain interprets this action as a sign that you are back in command, and the feeling of despair diminishes. The body also plays an important role in this process. When you feel powerless, your posture changes without you realizing it. Your shoulders slump, your breathing becomes shallow, your body shrinks. This shrinking reinforces the feeling of powerlessness and creates a cycle. Amy Cuddy's psychology shows that adjusting the body can adjust the mind. By adopting a more stable, open, and less withdrawn posture, your body sends a different signal to the brain. It's not about appearing strong, but about allowing the body to stop amplifying the feeling of weakness. When the body reorganizes itself, the mind follows. Ultimately, regaining control when everything is falling apart is a process that involves accepting that difficult moments are part of the human experience, but that you are not defined by them. Instability is not permanent. Chaos is not an identity. What changes the game is the ability to return to yourself, reduce the intensity of the moment, and create space to act. Life doesn't demand that you be invincible, only that you be conscious. Control is not in the outside world. It is born within you, in the moments when you choose to return to the present, breathe intentionally, organize what you can, and move forward firmly, even if slowly. That's how you regain command, even when everything around you seems to have collapsed. If this video opened your mind to a more powerful way to face life's setbacks, then subscribe now. Here you learn, every day, how to strengthen your mind, your body, and your ability to overcome when everything seems impossible. And before you leave, comment below which part resonated most with you. Your opinion can help someone else going through a difficult time. Let's grow together.